What's up, college football fans and Mean Green fans? Sonoy Valente here once again with the Mean Green Show. And today I'm joined by a very special guest in Brett Vito from the Denton Chronicle. Brett, thanks you so much for coming on. And before we get into all things related to Brett, guys, you already know the drill. If you're a fan of college football recruiting, G5 football, the transfer portal, any or all of the above, consider hitting that like and subscribe button because that is really all that we talk about. Brett, once again, just thank you for coming on. And, how has your summer been?
Well, it's been good, man. And thanks for having me on. I just kind of enjoy the summer. It's kind of a nonstop. If you cover a college football program, especially, or college athletics program, and you cover it by yourself, it's kind of a nonstop slog from when 2 days start until the end of basketball season. And if God forbid you've got a baseball team, then it lands all the way through baseball. And North Texas does have softball, so it's kind of a nonstop deal from the start of 2 days all the way to the end of when softball gets bounced or whatever, or track is actually usually the last thing. So yeah, once you hit the summer, it's kind of time to take some time off. So I took a couple of weeks off and just kind of tried to relax and then do a few summer projects that are always kind of popular to help get you through. But that's just kind of the standard drill of the way things go.
Yeah, so I guess you're gearing up for your long haul again here shortly here, huh?
Oh yeah, it's about ready to start, and then it'll be kind of nonstop until we at least get through basketball season. It gets a little bit easier once basketball's over. That's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah, well, kind of a little bit of a backstory to how Brett and I kind of came to the meeting on this show here is this past weekend. We actually totally coincidentally ran into each other at the local cheesecake factory there in South Lake, Texas. And yeah, I saw you, like I said, I was with my wife and you were rocking the mustache. I haven't seen that in your pictures. And I was like, man, that looks like Brett Vito. And obviously went up to you and what are the chances? You know what I mean? Very small world. But what'd you order that night? What did you guys get?
Oh yeah, I'm a big, pasta, like seafood pasta kind of guy. And then, we had one of those nice big pieces of cheesecake there. But yeah, that was kind of random. I mean, if you hang around in the media long enough and like where you're a little bit of people know who you are, you run into people a lot of different places. So that's not real unusual. It's just kind of cool that I happened to run into you there. Back in the day when they used to do the picket line in the paper all the time, especially in the Dallas Morning News, and I don't know if I'll be in there again this year. I would assume they'll have me back, but you'd be surprised how many like convenience store clerks recognize you because they're, especially the guys that work there overnight, because they're all sitting there, there's nothing to do, and they read the paper.
Yeah,
you get recognized from the picket line more than anything else for picks and stuff. It's really interesting that's where people know you from. But yeah, when your picture's in the paper or on the website all the time, it's not super unusual just to run into people at airports and stuff like that to recognize you. But it was cool that I managed to catch you.
Yeah, very cool. And actually, before, there was an hour-long wait and everything. And so my wife and I, we just kind of walked around the town square a little bit, made our way to the Apple store. And they had a policeman in there, and he was talking to this guy. And I kid you not, they were talking. I just heard a little bit of it. I thought about kind of chiming in, but I didn't. They literally were saying like, well, I know they got Reuter, so it'll be interesting. So it was kind of like, and I was, telling my wife, I was like, they were talking about the quarterback competition at North Texas. And then right after that, we run into you. So there was a lot of buzz about the Mean Green in South Lake this past weekend. So that's interesting stuff. But yeah, before we dive into all things, UNT football related, really. So like we spoke briefly at the Cheesecake Factory, you went to school in Missouri. So what is the path that led you to where you are today?
It's kind of the typical journalism story. I mean, when you get out of school, it's not like, being a business guy or being an accountant or something like that. You don't really pick where you go. Where you end up going is where there's a job. I mean, it's not like there's, a ton of journalism jobs. They've dwindled over the years. So when I got out of school, or when I was getting ready to get out of school, I, sent resumes scattershot across the country to everywhere, just trying to find some place to land. And the thing I made kind of a mistake coming out because I had a pretty good resume. I interned at a couple of good papers. I won some college journalism awards, and I kind of panicked and took the first job that was offered to me, which was this. And this is a fun story. It was a tiny one-person shop in Illinois, in this place called Olney, Illinois, that is known for having one of the largest colonies of white squirrels in the world. There's like these albino squirrels. They look like they're freaky. They're just like these little squirrels that look like squirrels, but they were all albino and had little red beady eyes. And so I was a one-man shop there, and I got there, and I'm like, I was there for a little while, a few months, and I'm like, man, I really fucked up here.
Yeah.
You know, because I kept getting calls from other bigger papers across the country where, you know, you wouldn't have to be a one-man band. And so finally I was like, forget this. And there's a guy named Todd who called me from Texas, and he's like, hey, we've got a 3-man staff here. We really like your stuff, and we'll take you sight unseen. You don't even have to come visit. We'll just hire you, and you can come down here. So I just packed up my stuff and just moved across the country, landed at the Herald Democrat in Sherman and Denison, stayed there for 3 years. I really wanted to get into college athletics. That's what was kind of my career goal. So I stayed there, and I covered a really good, the high school. So I had a high school I covered, and then I had a junior college team that I covered was Grayson. And that was when Tim Tadlock, now the head coach at Texas Tech, was there. So I was there when they won a couple of World Series, which was really fun. And then I kind of parlayed that into going to Abilene to cover Abilene Christian, which is a Division II school, which I actually know Jared Mosley from there.
Really?
Yeah, so I knew him there. And so then I parlayed that, and I did well there and won some journalism awards, things like that. And I managed to use that to jump to Denton to finally get a chance to cover a Division I school. And I was working for the DRC and then the DMN on the side, and then you kind of, after a while, you make so many jumps and you've only got so many left in you, I just ended up kind of deciding to stay, and I ended up staying for all these years, which has kind of worked out nice. I mean, I'm still in the business. A lot of guys I know aren't.
Yeah.
They've gotten bounced out or whatever. So it just worked out, and I kind of ended up staying.
How did you like your time in Abilene? I went to junior college in Cisco, which is, if you've been to Abilene, you probably drove past Cisco. But did you like living out there? Was that too small for you? Or what was your?
Oh, it's brutal out there. I mean, if you live in Abilene,
yes,
it's just. I mean, there's a lot of nice people there, but it's a very churchy town. There's no, the bars close at like 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's a very isolated kind of existence out there. Great family town, but if you're not. If you're not looking to knock out a couple of kids and sit there and pick it, there's not a lot to do, it's just, so it's kind of a brutal place to go. So I ended up staying there for about 3 years, and then I ended up landing here, and then it just kind of ended up working out. Yeah.
3 years in some of those small towns can feel a lot longer than 3 years. That's crazy. So you've been with the DRC now for how long?
Well, I came right before the 2003 football season started.
Okay.
So I've been hanging around for a long time, kind of seeing the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
Saw the bowl wins and the bowl, the NCAA tournament and the NCAA tournament wins, and got a chance to cover some really great people as far as coaches go, like Johnny Jones and Tina Slinker. And, Dan McCarney was a great guy. And then, also had to slog through, a couple of 1-11 football seasons. I had to deal with the whole Todd Dodge era, which was absolutely brutal, and so, it's been ups and downs, but, lately it's been a hell of a lot better ever since Ren Baker's gotten here. He's so great to deal with, so great to work with. And Jared, who, like I've known forever. So, I mean, he's been great to work with, and some of the, most of the coaches now have been really pleasant to be around and deal with. So that's been nice. That's made it, being around for a long time. It makes it a lot easier when you have people like that to deal with. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I remember when Ren came in, and his son Riley, to couple it with him, there was a lot of hype, and obviously it didn't, translate to the success on the field that we were all hyped up for. And so you traveled to all the away games too?
Yeah, I haven't missed an away game in. We talked about it last year because during the pandemic, we were trying to cut budget and stuff, and
right.
We quit going to basketball in the middle of the Tony Benford era when he was murdering the program. Because we weren't going to pay to do that because nobody was reading basketball anymore. The only thing anybody cared about was when were they going to fire Tony Benford.
Right.
So we quit going, and we haven't started going back to road games since and I'm sure we won't, but I've been to every North Texas football game since 2003. Haven't missed any of them. I've come close a couple of times with disastrous travel situations. There was the year they played in Akron. This is a fun story. So I fly and I always have to fly the cheapest possible way I can get there.
Right,
so I'm flying from DFW, and I thought this was going to be an easy trip. I'm like, okay, well, I have flying the night before, so it won't be a bit disaster. So I fly into Chicago. They delay us out of DFW because of really bad thunderstorms in Chicago. They finally send us off. We get to Chicago, and the plane to Akron's already gone.
Oh.
And they're like, oh, we'll just put you on the next flight. Well, all the Akron flights were backed up, and everybody was trying to, there's a certain amount of traffic that was there. Plus, there's all the people trying to get to the game. But long story short, I ended up sleeping in the Chicago airport, and I got on as the last standby on the last flight to Akron, and I managed to jump off the plane, run, get my rental car, drive straight to the stadium there, and I walked in and went and washed, rinsed my face off in the press box at the Akron Stadium up there, and ended up covering the game and made it. But that was one of the true close calls. But I've been to every one for all these years now.
Yeah, my mom, she worked for American Airlines for 30 plus years, and ever since I've been alive. And so we've flown a lot of standby, and I have slept in a lot of different airports around the country, including Chicago. And so I'm very familiar with an airport sleep. However, I'm not familiar with having to do an airport sleep and then, having to wake up and go do something productive. So, man, I bet that was a grind. And you probably have never been as thankful to be back in your own bed after that Akron nightmare.
Oh yeah, that was pretty tough, but I made it through, and that was the one close call. So hopefully I won't have any ones like that again. But
is there any spot that that we go to consistently that you enjoy going to as far as away games go?
The ones that are the most fun, and I know North Texas fans hate to hear this, is when you go to the big SEC venues or the big Big Ten venues. I mean, there's some cool stops that North Texas would go to every year. Like when they used to go to Louisiana Lafayette, that was a really cool stop. If you ever go to Lafayette, you got to go to, I'm going to forget the name of it. There's a very famous Cajun place there, Perini's. Or Prejean's or whatever. I think it's Prejean's there in Lafayette. That was always a really cool stop. I always liked going there. But the ones that were the most fun are like when they went to, to Clemson, or they went to LSU a couple times, is Death Valley, and you get to go to those big, huge venues. I mean, the game's kind of brutal. I mean, it's easier to write because, the game's over right away. Yeah. You know what's going to happen. But just going to those really cool, big venues is kind of what I've always enjoyed. They're supposed to go to Wisconsin in a couple of years. That would be a good one because I like to see jump around in the third quarter at Wisconsin and those kinds of things. Those are really neat. Or when they went to Alabama and they sing "Sweet Home Alabama" in the third quarter, in these big packed stadiums. I mean, things like that are really kind of cool.
Yeah. And what is it, like 11 years we're going to Colorado or something like that? I think
I was there when Jamario went nuts. That there's a very cool backstory about how Jamario actually ended up playing in that game that I cannot ever repeat. But there's a really fun story about actually the logistics of why Jamario had to play in that game.
Yeah.
If Patrick Cobbs was watching this, he's probably chuckling behind the scenes. There's a very cool story about that. But yeah, I was there when Jamario took the first handoff from Scott and just housed it in Colorado, and that he ended up rushing for 247 yards that game in his first shot out of the box there. So yeah, that was kind of a fun trip.
So you were covering the team when Cobbs was playing then, right?
Oh yeah. When Patrick was
yeah. So how? I'm sure have you talked with him? I mean, is it kind of just like funny full circle? You've talked to him as a player. I'm assuming you've talked to him some as a coach. Is there ever kind of like I don't know, just like how is that weird, odd? Is that cool? Like, what is that like?
That's kind of cool. I mean, you know the guy forever.
Yeah.
He ended up marrying I'm almost positive is a North Texas soccer player. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think he ended up marrying one of the girls from the soccer team, and they've got a bunch of kids now and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of cool. We did that story a couple of years ago when they had him, and then they hired in the cornerbacks coach. Clay Jennings was also a UNT former player, so we did that story 1 year.
The last question before we get into, present day North Texas, did you, he was a center for like 4 years, like started like for 4 years, Brewster, last name Brewster, first name, I can't remember. Andy Brewster.
Yeah. Brewster.
He was my junior college. He was the O-line offensive coordinator at Cisco Junior College, where I went to play JUCO ball. And man, he was I have nothing but good things to say about him, but he's by far, I can't say it and have it be recorded, but the things that he would say were off the wall, like to like the players. If things weren't going right, off the wall. Was he pretty intense as a player? Oh
yeah, Brewster was great. And the thing that's funny about Brewster is, that was before I even got here, was he was such a great player in Midland Lee.
Yeah.
The only reason he was on and this was the credit to the guys that were coaching back then. Your Spencer Leftwiches of the world and those guys, they were adept at going out and finding these guys that were under recruited or had some kind of, academic issue or whatever. But they knew these guys could play. And the deal with Brewster was he was 247 pounds when he graduated, but he was just an animal.
Yeah.
And they figured they could get him here and play him at center as a little undersized center, and then he would just excel. And that's what happened. He came here and he was just terrific for 4 years. They plugged him in. It was before I got here, but they plugged him in as a freshman, and that guy never came out of the lineup. And that was part of what made them so great, those teams, how they were able to run the ball so effectively. They had Andy, and then they had Nick Zuniga, who was another guy with that kind of an unusual background that they had no business getting. If he would have been if he would have had a standard background in high school football, he would have been a Power 5 guy easily. But they had Zuniga right next to him, and all these guys, and they were just ran it down everybody's throats. But they were just Brewster was an animal. He was just a great player.
Yeah, he told us, because I took a coaching class that he was the professor of, and it was really grueling. But no, it was a lot of fun. But he was just telling us stories. He said when he came to North Texas and he weighed initially, he snuck like 2 5-pound plates in some of his pockets to try to weigh more or whatever, just because that was the knock on him, is he's so light. But then he said, when he got out on the field, the coaches were pretty pleased. And man, I believe it. He was not a coach that you wanted to try your luck with. He was just crazy enough to back up what he was saying, and he was something. But anyway, so switching, back to present day North Texas, and I want to kind of kick things off with Ren Baker and all this Missouri talk. Do you think there's any viscosity to that? I know what he was at Missouri and everything, but do you think? I know all North Texas, myself included, all the fans, we don't want to hear that. Do you think there's any outside shot he could go as soon as before the season?
I think it's going to depend. Yeah, I think there's definitely a chance, but I think the thing that's going to you got to look at here is what's going to happen in Missouri. I think Ren is really happy here, and I think he's said that over and over and over again. The question I think will be, does Missouri, just throw the kitchen sink at him? Because I know for a fact that Ren Baker has been approached, talked about, been a person that's been thought of as a possibility for multiple Power 5 jobs over the time that he's been here, and he's never really pursued chasing one of those kind of things. He could have been long gone by now. I think the thing that may change things a little bit here, does Mizzou come and throw the kitchen sink at him? Mm-hmm. Because then that would give him something. That would give him potentially something to think about. And I don't think that's any big secret. If Mizzou came in and offered him some astronomical amount of money and some long-term contract, then maybe that would happen. Do I think he'll go chasing another job? Probably not, especially with his girls the age that they are. But do they offer him some kind of come in and give him something that he can't refuse. Now I think that would change the dynamic.
Yeah, well, selfishly, I hope they don't. I hope we can keep him here as long as we can. Going over to Seth Littrell, we were talking to you at Cheesecake Factory, and the market, amongst North Texas fans, is kind of mixed on Seth Littrell. A lot of us, I'm more in the mindset of I like Seth Littrell. I want it to work out, and all that. And some people are just, no, it's just not good enough, whatever. But regardless of which way you cut it or which way you look at it, you shared with me that his contract, he's already hit something to where he's hit the amount of wins already or whatever. But can you kind of expound on the specifics of his contract presently and how the next 2 years can kind of look out or kind of shape up with his contract?
Yeah, here, let me pull that sucker up.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of us don't really understand like the finites and all the dollars amounts of like, well, it's not just as easy as firing a guy or removing. There's buyouts you have to do. And
take pause. Yeah, I don't know if I've got it right in front of me. I think I've got the physical copy on my desk. Maybe I don't have the digital one sitting here right in front of me. But if memory serves me right, I'm almost sure I have this right, is that there was a clause in his contract that said if you win X number of games at any point in this contract, that the base amount would then become guaranteed for the duration of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thing that is the thing that would make it a little bit more problematic. You know what I mean? If they wanted to get out of it, that kind of thing. But I would have to look at the actual physical copies. I don't have it sitting right in front of me. But yeah, I believe the clause was is if he won, I think it was like 8 games, 7 games at any point during the duration of the term, then the base salary would become guaranteed for the length of the contract. And He hit that escalator clause. So that would make it a little bit more problematic to buy him out. Now, when you talk about Seth Littrell, I mean, I always look at, people always say, there's a lot of, you're paying a lot for not a heck of a lot of for not a lot of production. Now, the thing that I always harken back to is I think you got to kind of know who you are as a program. Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing is with Littrell, before they got there, they really struggled to get to bowl games, to get anything done, and then he comes and takes them to bowl games in 4 out of 5 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's put them on a pretty solid foundation, if you ask me. And, you look back at where they were at before, I think it'd be awfully, awfully hard to say, what we want to do is we want to blow this whole thing up.
Right.
And go ahead and start over again.
Right.
And that's the thing I would kind of caution as far as that goes. I mean, that's an awful lot of rebuilding to do, and you'd really have to make a smart hire to
justify that.
Yeah, to buy him out and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it would be a pretty painful deal, and I just think with as much as he's accomplished there, that would be a kind of a tough pill for them to swallow.
Yeah, and speaking of, I mean, like where North Texas was again, like before he got here, it was not a good place, and like you said, yeah, I mean, we've gone to 4 bowl games out of the 5 years, haven't won one yet, but hopefully soon. But do you almost feel like he might have like, I wouldn't say peaked, but just hit his high too early in his, in his career to where, okay, now we expect this from you and nothing less will do. Because again, before he got here, I mean, it was, it wasn't as good as it is now, as distasteful as that it may be to hear for some fans, but then that's just kind of the facts.
Yeah. that's the other thing I always point to. And one other point about the fit with Littrell is he seems like such a great fit at North Texas. I mean, can you imagine a more North Texas guy than Seth showing up? I mean, you look at like coaching days and stuff like that, and he's sitting up there in cowboy boots and and all that kind of stuff. He's just
blue collar. Yeah,
he's such a good fit for this place.
Yeah,
and, So. And I think that the expectations thing is one thing that really kind of skews everything. Because I mean, he took over a team at 1-11. So say like in a standard rise of a program thing, say his first year they win 4 games, and then the second year they win maybe 6 games but don't get a bowl bid. Then the next year they win 7, 8 games, they get into a bowl. Then they win 9 games and go to the conference. The conference championship game. I mean, you kind of have a standard rise there. But when he hit on Mason Fine and they immediately started going to all those bowl games in a row, then everybody kind of you kind of skipped all those beginning steps you would figure for a coach taking over a 1-11 team. You immediately jump to the point of, okay, we're going to bowl games every year. And that they just have kind of struggled to take that next step. And I think that one of the things you have to remember when you look at that, I mean, look at who they played in bowls. I asked him this question once in a press conference, and even I knew I wasn't going to get the answer I was looking for, but I asked it anyway. I was like, do you ever wish that you guys would get like a Sun Belt Conference team that wasn't like nationally ranked, or somebody that's a little more beatable? I mean, look at who they've got. They got Troy was absolutely loaded. Utah
State with Jordan Love,
ranked with an NFL quarterback. Then you get Appalachian State, which was they ended up being nationally ranked that year. They just had horrible luck in terms of who they ended up playing in bowl games. The first year Army was a winnable game, but I mean, how many other realistic?
When we got into that Army game because of like weren't we just like a 5-win team when we went to that game, to that bowl game?
On academic progress,
yeah. Yeah,
because it ended up being there were some extra bowl slots, and they're trying to push academics being a bigger part of the of what makes you successful in college athletics, and they got in on basically, Dan McCartney was really good about academics, and so is Littrell, and they've got a really good academic crew over there, and that managed to get them into that game that first year. So. But I think there's something to be said. Another coach told me, and this was a basketball coach back in the day that I still stay in touch with at North Texas. It wasn't Johnny, because everybody's going to think it's Johnny, but it was another coach, and it wasn't Benford either, I'll tell you that. But, one of these other coaches that's come through here said, what you need to do as a program is you need to get to the point where you're consistently competing for postseason and conference titles. And when you get to that point where you're doing that year in and year out and year in and year out, eventually you're going to hit the point where you break through and you take that next step. Mm-hmm. And I think they've kind of gotten to that point where they're consistently there. They're consistently a bowl-worthy team. It's just the question is, are they going to get some decent luck in terms of getting a decent opponent in the postseason, or maybe breaking through and winning the division or Conference USA. But you got to think Conference USA is a pretty big league. There's a lot of teams out there. You got to be the one team that that breaks through in a year, and that's awfully tough to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel. And how do you feel? I mean, do you feel like if we were to do that, I mean, just being geographically where we are and kind of what we have to offer from a just our athletic amenities compared to other Conference USA schools, that if we were to break through and maybe win the conference, so that we could build pretty quickly off of that momentum, even more so than we already have?
Oh, it certainly help. Yeah. I mean, I think they've got a lot to work with. I mean, when you compare it to the other schools in the league, as far as location goes, as far as they've got really good facilities and things like that, I think that gives them a big advantage. Sometimes I think North Texas fans kind of overestimate a little bit what that does for you. I think having great facilities is super important, especially where North Texas is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, kind of shifting over to the schedule here, which I've talked about the schedule so many times, I've almost got it committed to memory. But so it's pretty tough, front heavy. Northwestern State at SMU, UAB at La Tech, at Missouri, Marshall, and Liberty, who are both ranked very high. Then we go into the Rice stretch, where it's a little bit more winnable. Not counting UTSA, obviously, that's going to be a tough one. Do you feel that the UAB and La Tech, one of those two, is we have to win one of those two in order to keep this thing afloat? Because I mean, if not, then if we lose both of those games, it's pretty presumable that we'll go into Marshall at 1-4. And how much can we really rally at 1-4, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on the schedule as a whole and the kind of front end? And do you think UAB and La Tech are a must win?
Well, I totally agree with you. This whole season is all going to be about surviving the first part of that schedule. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And the unfortunate thing about this, and this is kind of a North Texasism, because, North Texas, everything that can't go wrong will go wrong. It's kind of the way it goes. But you schedule these teams so far out in advance. I mean, you schedule Liberty. I have the contract. I'd have to look and see when that thing was signed. But it was forever ago. Did anybody think – do you honestly think they thought, you know what? Let's go schedule Liberty, because by the time we play them at home in 2021, they're going to be a top 16 team in the country. No way. But that's one of those things that happens. And, it ended up being they got a really tough one. I bet you if you got all these people in a moment of honesty, they would say, man, I really wish we would have scheduled a more winnable game. Because, I mean, you go back and we wrote this story with Ren Baker back – when he first got here, and they had these leftover Rick Villarreal schedules that are basically get us enough money to keep the athletic department afloat kind of thing. And he talked about you want to have a winnable game. You want to have a couple of home and home type series with teams that are on an equal level. And you can make an argument that SMU is kind of that way, even though SMU is kind of started to elevate itself there a little bit. And then like one stretch game where maybe you could possibly think about getting over the hump and winning a big game against a team like that, and just completely do away with the body bag type games. And that's the way they've scheduled. But I don't think when they scheduled Liberty, they thought Liberty was going to be one of those, well, the chances of us winning that game are pretty slim,
right,
kind of thing. So it just worked out that way. And now I think if you look at it from North Texas, you just got to hope that you can survive that first stretch of the season. If you can somehow manage to get through there, I think Louisiana Tech's is the game.
That we got to win.
I think that's the one that you could potentially look at. I mean, UAB at home, yeah. But, man, UAB brought everybody back from that defense. They've got a really good running back. I mean, they're not a team that's going to go out and score a heck of a lot of points on you, but that seems like it's an awful tough game. And the thing that really I think was kind of a worrisome deal is that all of a sudden Louisiana Tech, which looks like the game you really need to win, they go out and grab the former West Virginia quarterback that was at Oklahoma. They all of a sudden look a lot tougher with that kid coming in. If he wins that job – all of a sudden Louisiana Tech at Louisiana Tech
and they got that App State running back.
Well, and not just that. I mean, there's a whole host of guys. Yeah. They got the App State running back. They got the guy coming in from West Virginia. They went real heavy into the portal. Now, not all those guys are probably going to work out, but I bet enough of them are that Skip's going to have a pretty good team.
Yeah, and hearing you speak on the SMU UNT rivalry on Underdog Dynasty with Eric Henry. You made a lot of really great points that some of my professors even kind of spoke about as far as like the difference between SMU and UNT and how UNT is more of a blue collar school. And, it's just different. There's a pretty significant difference between the UNT population and the SMU population. Not going to say better or worse, but definitely different. And, but you kind of almost alluded to where it sounded like, maybe I'm not saying that you think we're going to win per se, but like almost like, maybe we can go in there and stun them. They're coming on to a new quarterback, granted that quarterback might be lights out amazing, but what are your thoughts on the UNT SMU rivalry as a whole, as well as this game? I mean, do you think, you put any stock in us going into, what is it, Ford Stadium and shocking them? Is it Ford Stadium, their stadium?
Yeah, it's Ford down there, but, yeah, well, they haven't won down there since, 1922?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
And now, of course, every North Texas fan that's watching this is screaming at me, well, we never get to, they never come here, and, it's they cheated for a long time, and, you get all the standard stuff. But, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is for whatever reason, they just have not been able to pull through against SMU and Dallas. Now, if it would have been different if the first year Littrell was here, or maybe it wasn't the first year, but early on, North Texas got that big win against SMU, and it was at home. I mean, maybe if that game was played in Dallas, it would have turned out the same way, or maybe they would have won it again. And I think the problematic thing about the SMU series for North Texas is that it's such a big series for UNT fans, and all the SMU fans will scream that it's not really a rivalry, and they don't consider North Texas a rivalry or anything like that.
But if we were to beat them in SMU, they would consider it a rivalry, I'm sure.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they don't consider it a rivalry, but there would be blood in the streets if they lost to North Texas, especially in Dallas. So I think there's there's really good elements of rivalry there, and it would do North Texas so much good to win that game, to win a game against SMU again. And it seems like it's such a rough deal for them to try to go down there. And I think what I was getting to about the problem with the SMU series is, it's great for if you win it, but man, if you lose it, especially if you get smoked, the fan base just goes, the feeling among UNT fans just goes, down into the toilet for, arguably for a pretty significant chunk of the season, especially if they don't win another game after that. A lot of people kind of consider it a 1-game season, and now you're going down to Florida where you never win. They've got a whole bunch of really good players coming back. They took Trey Siggers as a graduate transfer. So, you're thinking, man, is this going to be one of those North Texas-isms where, Trey Siggers comes out and rushes for 100 yards against them or something like that?
Yeah.
But so that's a game you kind of look at and you're like, they could pull a stunner. You don't want to be a Debbie Downer, especially when you cover a team like that. But, they're going to be pretty big underdogs. You just hope that maybe they've got something up their sleeve.
Right. Talking a little bit on conference realignment, obviously Texas and OU seem to be shaking the entire college football world and landscape from the top to the bottom. And, do you feel like G5 schools, maybe this next year or two are kind of almost and maybe potentially like doing an audition of like, okay, is the Big 12 going to take more teams? Is the Big 12 going to disperse, or is the American going to grow? And, how likely do you think it is that Conference USA is going to look the same, in 3 years? And what are your thoughts on all the whole, this, that, and the other when it comes to the conference realignment and as it pertains to UNT and G5 schools?
Well, I think it's inevitable you see some kind of movement here. Because, Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC now. You've only got the Big 12 shrinks again. They've got to do something. Does the Big 12 just hang it up and go home? I don't think so. They've got a good commissioner. I think they would do what everybody else has done in the past. You look down the line, you say, hey, are there some good teams that we can pilfer here? And, SMU would give a lot to get into there. Cincinnati would make a lot of sense. So do they go raid the ace, the American, and then everything trickles down from there? I mean, that seems to be the most likely scenario, if you ask me, is you see some teams, you see the Big 12 respond, they end up taking some teams from the American, and then the American's got to look at what it wants to do. And, it keeps continuing from there.
Yeah. Yep. It'll be interesting, and hopefully North Texas can, again, muster up some surprisingly good seasons this next season or 2 or 3. And, you never know. It's interesting to talk about and speculate. Okay, so talking about another popular topic amongst UNT fans is this quarterback battle. We also obviously have Austin Aune, the returner, co-starter from last year, who showed a lot of good flashes at times. And then we have a high-powered, very highly rated 4-star guy in Jace Reuter, coming down from North Carolina. And, there's kind of a mixed market on both. Some people are very pro on Aune, some are very pro on Reuter. And I think the argument for Aune is, just he knows the system already, which I'm sure he does. He's been in the program for a good amount of time and is a very decent QB. Obviously, Pro Football Focus, take it with a grain of salt, but they're ranking him high in a lot of things and a lot of their ratings. And then Reuter, the knock on Reuter is, okay, he doesn't know the offense. He hasn't played in X amount of years. But the pro side of Reuter is, I hear a lot from North Carolina fans of, he was in a pretty tightly contested QB battle for a while with Sam Howell, which obviously, Sam Howell is, maybe top 2-3 quarterback in college football. So, what are your thoughts on the battle itself? And do you think we're going to go into another 2 QB system this year, like last year, like a hot hand situation? Or, do you expect, if you had to make, your take on it, like, do you expect one of them is going to separate? And who do you think that guy's going to be?
I think it's a great question, because I don't think any of us know anything at this point. It would be one thing if Jace got here in time for spring practice and they rolled the ball out in the spring, and all of us got to sit, especially the media members and the people that pay attention and have watched enough of the program to kind of have a handle on it. If we could have gone out there and seen Jace play in the spring, I think we would know. With him not getting here in time for spring practice and missing all that work, I just don't think any of us are going to have a handle on it. I don't think any of us are going to know anything until they kick off the season, because I can tell you one thing for sure. There's that one open practice that they have to kind of tempt the fans to come and pick up their tickets. Come pick up your tickets, and we're going to have an open session of practice. And I guarantee you nothing of interest is going to happen in that open session of practice.
Right.
That's what's going to happen. You're going to go out there, you're going to see they're all going to stretch, and then they're all going to run some generic drills, and then they're all going to run off the field. And we're not going to see a darn thing until the season starts. And the only thing we're going to know is what Littrell and Tommy Maynard and, Coach Blesh and those guys tell us. Now, luckily we've been here. I've been here for long enough that maybe you can kind of get these guys into a moment of honesty, but you're not going to get a super moment of honesty. I remember back when, in their defense, back when we went through this last time, when it was Mason and, the Alabama transfer, they talked to Mason quite a bit, and we're kind of like, you got to transfer from Alabama.
Yeah.
Are you really going to go with the little 5'11" freshman kid, from Oklahoma that played in class 0 football, that, played against a bunch of other farm kids from Oklahoma? Does that sound realistic? But in their defense, they say, hey, Mason looks really good, and they kept talking him up. And then lo and behold, when the ball got rolled out there, and they ended up going with Mason for a big chunk of that year. And, the both of them together helped them get to that bowl game. So I don't know. I'll be real interested to see if we can hear from Seth, and we can hear from Blesh, and we can hear from, the new quarterbacks coach, and maybe we kind of get some indication from what they say. But I think that's going to be the only thing we're going to know, is what those guys are saying. And then it's going to be all about that first game is going to be big, because my guess is going to be that both of those guys, unless Rudder just shows up and just looks completely unprepared, which I kind of doubt. He's got enough skins on the wall that I think he'll come in and he'll be able to, and I've talked to him, he seems like a smart guy. Mm-hmm. He'll at least be able to come in and get an opportunity really. Because, do you go out, if you're North Texas, you got a returning starting quarterback, do you go out and go hunt for a grad transfer if you're completely happy with what you got? Probably not. So I think you don't bring a 4-star kid in of that talent, of that ilk.
So already crowded quarterback room at that.
Yeah, so you already got a bunch of guys. So my guess is that they're going to roll the ball out there, and both those guys see some time in that first game. And then depending on what happens from there, maybe we see both of them in the second game. And then as the season goes on, you hope that one of them kind of separates themselves. If not, you may end up seeing them play both, because Littrell's always been like, you need multiple quarterbacks to get through the season. That's just his MO.
Yeah. Shifting things over to recruiting, our recruitment has definitely been way more productive than it has in past years, with back-to-back second in the conference classes as far as recruiting rankings go. And, this year we're bringing in 9 transfers, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 transfers. And what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think the uptick has been? I mean, do you think that's Seth Littrell? Do you think it's the other coaches building relationships, a mixture of both? And also, how do you think we're going to continue to, plunder the transfer portal going forward? Do you think that's something we're going to see like in the future signing classes, like, 8 or 9 guys, kind of a balance of half high school, half transfer portal? Or do you think we're going to kind of stay the high school route, or do you think we'll even shift more to the transfer route, being with this new rule that's passed for the transfers?
They've always been big on signing high school guys. That was their whole thing, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're in the DFW area. You've got the advantage when it comes to location, because there's so many great players around here. I think in Luke and the other guys in their charge of recruiting, I think a lot of them have always leaned towards, we want to get high school guys and build with high school guys and kind of fill in with what we get in the transfer portal. Now, I think they've kind of looked around and saw what SMU and some of these other schools have managed to do in the transfer portal. And I think that maybe has caused them to look at doing a little bit more of that. And I think, what ends up happening down the line, I think will depend largely on what happens with this batch. I mean, they've got a lot of good guys in theory that are coming in. Tommy Bush is a really highly regarded guy. Enoch Jackson, Jace Reuter, you got Tyree Thornton coming over from Rice, things like that. I mean, does this batch pan out better than previous batches I think is going to be the big question, because, in the past they've gone after some grad transfer guys and they just haven't panned out like they have for other schools. You know what I mean? Ron Tiavaso, the tight end from Snow College, he ends up coming over and didn't end up staying. Devontae McCray was I kind of thought maybe he was going to be a huge difference maker right out the box last year.
I did too. Yeah.
And he didn't end up really helping. Well, I mean, he helped. He was a good player. He just wasn't the big difference maker they thought he was going to be. Jordan Rucker came over from Purdue, ends up opting out of the season. And I think probably the thing that's kind of hurt North Texas a little bit here in recent years is they just haven't hit on their transfers like some of these other schools have. I mean, you look at what SMU has done in the portal, or you look at some of these
FAU,
FAU. David Sow was a guy they signed out of. Well, he wasn't a transfer, but he was a junior college guy. He didn't pan out. Dominique Harrison, Nick Harvey, DeAndre Planton. A solid players, not a lot of difference makers, and I think that's going to that's been part of North Texas's problem these last couple of years, is they just haven't hit on a lot of those transfers, and they really need to change that. And if they do, I think that'll kind of, determine a little bit of how much more they do that in the future.
Right. All right. Well, before I let you go, kind of switching over to your profession and everything. I mean, obviously when I read your readings, I mean, it's pretty apparent that you try to keep just reporting the facts kind of thing, not a fan, not someone who's against the team, but I know a lot of the North Texas fans, they're kind of quick to like call you out, like, why are you always saying this, whatever. But being that it is that you cover this team for so long, is it hard not to want them to do well or root for them, or like, how do you keep your emotions out of it? A, and then B, like, do you feel like, are you kind of deep down inside, like, are you really rooting for them to do well? How does all that work for you?
Well, it helps. I mean, it helps immensely when they're doing well. Nobody likes to. I mean, you think back to the Todd Dodge era. I mean, I spent 4 years basically writing about how terrible they were and how they were screwing absolutely everything up, and that was what was happening. That's what we had to write. Yeah. But nobody likes to see your smiling face coming in every day for 4 years to write about how terrible you've done. What a terrible job you've done. It's just not a pleasant thing for anybody involved. So yeah, it's exponentially more. It's easier. You get better stories. It's just a better experience overall when they're winning. And you bring up a really interesting point. So yeah, it would be much easier for me if they would do well, and it's more pleasant. You get better stuff. Yeah. But I was raised in the old time journalism ethic of, you are a neutral observer for the reader out there that wants an unbiased opinion of what the heck is going on. And the reason it's so interesting now is because all the old guys like me and the guys that have been in the newspaper business for all these years, we've stuck by that ethic forever. And the industry's changed a little bit because, they have these 247 sites and these recruiting sites and things like that. And you go to games and stuff like that, you see these guys from these recruiting websites, and you saw this last year, like when North Texas made the NCAA tournament, they're cheering and, filming, jumping up and down and, dabbing, dabbing the players and having the AD rip up the bracket and all that stuff. I mean, if I would have done that, if an editor of mine ever saw me doing something like that, they would be all over me. And it's just an interesting thing, because that ethic of, you got to be the neutral observer and kind of do those things. It seems like it's kind of, in some respects, for some of these sites, it's just completely gone out the window.
Right.
But I think that's part of what makes us a little bit different, is that we're, you try to play it down the middle. You try to do the right thing by the journalistic standards. And actually, some of the North Texas people will always look at me a little sideways like that. Like I was at the soccer NCAA tournament party a year ago, and they're passing out these little shawl type things. Soccer have those deals. Yeah, they're passing them out, and one of the girls that works in North Texas tried to hand me one. She's like, "You can't even put one on for this. You got to be that neutral." And I'm like, "Yes, I have to be that neutral." And she's like, "Okay." But it changed a little bit. But you try to stick with the values of journalism. At least I always have. But bottom line, yes, it would be much easier in my life if North Texas would be decent in everything across the board.
There we go. Brett Vito is not against the North Texas program. That's the moral of the story.
No, I'm not. I'm going to report the facts. If
right.
You don't get the facts, that's just, I'm sorry, but that's just what the facts are. Unfortunately, since Ren has gotten here and they've gotten some better coaches and some things have worked out. Fortunately, the truth in reporting it has gotten a lot better, which has made my life a lot easier.
Awesome. Well, all right, Brett, once again, thank you so much for jumping on. I really enjoyed it and appreciate your time, and, best of luck with the gauntlet that's coming on with your schedule. And, maybe sometime mid-season or quarter through the season, we can hop back on if you've got some time and kind of talk about how things are going at that point. But yeah, Brett, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely.